Hello, and welcome to the Biodiesel Magazine podcast. My name is Danielle Piekarski, and I am joined by our host, Anna Simet, and today's guest, Mindi Farber-DeAnda. Ladies, welcome to the Biodiesel Magazine podcast.
Thanks, Danielle.
Thank you.
Little bit about Mindi. She is the team lead for petroleum and natural gas modeling in the Long-Term Energy Modeling Office of the U.S. Energy Information Administration. She has over 30 years of experience in energy supply and demand analysis, deployment of renewable energy, electricity storage, emerging technologies, and assessment of infrastructure, assurance, and resiliency. Prior to joining the EIA in 2011, Mindi managed a variety of technical contractor projects for federal and state government agencies, electric utilities, and trade groups. And with that, I will turn things over to you, Anna.
Thank you so much, Danielle. Mindi, hello. So great to have you join the podcast.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
Yes, we're just thrilled to have you on here. So Danielle read your bio, so we know a little bit about your background. You guys do really fantastic work over at the EIA, always very helpful. So why don't we just jump right into things? Mindi, maybe let's start by, could you shine some light on what is happening right now with the biodiesel and renewable diesel production capacity across the U.S.?
Absolutely. So what we see at EIA is consistent growth in renewable diesel production capacity and sort of a stagnation on the biodiesel side. We put out data two different ways. We just released, I guess it was 2 days ago, our annual production capacity numbers for both biodiesel and renewable diesel facilities. And those are as of January 1st of 2022. And for biodiesel, we're currently seeing about 72 facilities, about 2.26 billion gallons per year. Okay. Now, with renewable diesel, which has been growing great guns, but what we do is, in order to protect the confidentiality of some of our respondents, and we have much fewer facilities in this realm. We only have about 11 plants, and it does include the category that we call other biofuels, which is anything that is not renewable diesel or biodiesel. Okay, so those 11 plants are at 1.75 billion gallons per year. So you see, there's not that big of a difference in terms of production capacity between renewable diesel and biodiesel currently in the United States. We also issue monthly status on what we call operating capacity, what's actually going on. It's sort of built off of the way we used to survey biodiesel exclusively. And now we do it for biodiesel, which is, well, if you saw 2.26 roughly in January, now it's down to 2.22 in May. And likewise, the renewable diesel and other category is up from 1.75 to 1.92 in May of this year. So we're seeing continued growth in the renewable diesel side and stagnation and slight shrinkage on the biodiesel side.
Right. And so, Mindi, just to follow up to that, why do you think, what's the reason for the slight dip in biodiesel production? Is it because some of these facilities are converting to renewable diesel?
You know, originally we thought that might be happening, but we're not seeing the conversion happening from biodiesel to renewable diesel because the facilities are so different. Many of the biodiesel facilities out there are so simple. They're in a shelter structure that's not very complex. The technology is just so much simpler than what we're seeing with renewable diesel. So those kinds of conversions, we're seeing more happening at refineries rather than from a biodiesel facility. We're seeing some closing of biodiesel facilities over time. We are seeing greater exports, but by the same token, not enough to warrant greater production continuing. Perhaps the multipliers that are used in with the renewable identification numbers, the RIN market that EPA manage. Maybe that is contributing in terms of the financial benefit they get versus, say, renewable diesel, because they're all fighting over those same volumes and likewise over similar feedstocks as well. So we see this, it's a little bit of a food fight, and renewable diesel right now gets a higher multiplier than biodiesel, and that seems to be contributing.
Thank you. Great answer, Mindi. In addition to standalone biofuel facilities, we're seeing conversions of refineries here in the U.S. Can you tell us what you see happening over the next year or two?
Sure. So we recently, I guess we're about to put out our what the status is on refining in the United States, and right now we see only 125 operating refineries in the United States and additional 5 idle refineries. They represent about like 17.8 or 9 million barrels a day. This is like the lowest level we've seen since 2014. So
wow.
What's contributing to that, right? There obviously some refineries are shutting down. Some have very simple regimes. They're not able to produce the crude or process the crude that is available to them, or it's just not economic in certain regions. But what we're seeing, or at least what we started to see in 2021, and again, some of these closings and shrinkage may be due to the COVID effects that occurred starting in 2020. But at EIA, we collect data as of the January 1st of each year. And so it's going to sound a little weird, but on January 1st, 2021, which you're saying, well, that's the middle of the COVID response period, right? But
yeah.
We saw a big drop in refining then, but we saw it was like 440,000 barrels a day that was capacity converted to renewable diesel. And that really happened in 2020, but it showed up on our records as of January 1 of 2021. We were expecting to see greater conversion in this last year, but there seemed to have been some delays given that the economic impacts of COVID were, extending. But as of January 1, 2023, based on our short-term energy outlook, we're expecting to see up to maybe 660,000 barrel a day additional conversion to renewable diesel. So we don't know what the number will be for our operating petroleum-based refineries, but we are seeing renewable diesel conversions eating into that.
Really interesting. So, Mindi, growing domestic capacity enables greater production of biodiesel and renewable diesel. What's the EIA's outlook in the short term?
So, for us, we see, well, let me put it this way. We've been waiting for renewable diesel to biodiesel in terms of production. And we've been watching month after month. And if you're a regular visitor to the EIA website, you'll know that we have these Today in Energy articles front and center on our website. And we've got one ready for when renewable diesel does in fact exceed biodiesel, but we're not quite there yet. And so what we're seeing in the short term with our CO is at about October of 2022, so not that far away, we're expecting renewable diesel production to actually exceed biodiesel production. And, those numbers, if you look at our CO on a monthly basis, you'll know that those numbers keep changing and evolving. And if you also look at the RIN data, the transaction data that EPA produces, you'd say, well, gee, it looks like we may have already crossed that threshold. But it's tough to know because EPA's timing for when they report and process those are different than the way EIA collects its data. And So you won't see that fully aligned, but we are calling for October, and we'll see if that month starts, moving forward. But right now, that's what we're seeing.
Oh, wow. Fascinating. So, Mindi, what do you include in your long-term outlook for biofuels, and can we expect to see anything new in 2023?
We are certainly hoping so. So what happens with us is that we've been kind of restricted in what we show in the EIA when it comes to biofuels. People who are familiar with our data tables will know that we do spell out ethanol, we do spell out biodiesel, and then we kind of have other things. So it's really tough to pull out the renewable diesel unless you know where to look. And we do have additional tables, or people who are modelers are familiar and can find that. But this past year, we did have narrative where we actually called out what was going on with renewable diesel. And that helped people appreciate where we were seeing things going. And just to be clear, what's going on in that narrative was, look, we've had refinery conversions, we're seeing growth in standalone facilities, and basically renewable diesel is going to overtake biodiesel and remain that way in the future. But for us, a lot of what goes on, or I should say, spurs on the use, the production and consumption of these fuels are policies. And our long-term outlook is really very neutral when it comes to policies. Like, we'll have separate side cases that address policies, but when you look at an EIA long-term outlook, you're looking at something very vanilla, very, what is in effect here and now. And so with RFS, the Renewable Fuel Standard, being year to year, you have to make some gross estimates as to what's going to happen in the future. And we tend to flatline the long-term outlook on something like that. So you don't see a huge run-up in renewable diesel or anything in our outlooks. It would require additional policy and financial incentives and other things to move that along. But I also wanted to mention what we're going to do that's different in 2023. And part of the stuff is, well, you guys know, EPA came out with its latest RFS, its Renewable Fuel Standard volume obligations through 2022. A little delayed, but still it gives us data to work with, at least targets to work with. So we're incorporating that, because many years it will come out after our outlook work is done. And so then you've got some kind of EIA guesstimate as to what that might be. So at least now we know what it is, at least for this year. And then we've got some updates to E15. I'm sure you've seen that there have been waivers nationwide permitting greater E15, and now there's a new one that folks go out beyond August 29th or something like that. That type of thing, we'll be able to show that a little bit more, because typically we just show the E85 and not actually call out the E15. So again, we'll be able to do that. We're incorporating Oregon's Clean Fuels program. We've had California LCFS, Low Carbon Fuel Standard in there for a number of years, and now we're finally including Oregon. And the big news for us is representation finally of sustainable aviation fuel. Now, do we expect to see large volumes in a reference case? No. It would require either a really high oil price or something to go on to sort of spur on, SAF penetration at a higher level. But it will finally be evident in our outlooks, and we think that will be a good thing. It'll provide more transparency in the market, and we're hoping that our stakeholders will appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely. So kind of on that note, you mentioned EIA has enhanced its data collection and reporting of biofuels, excluding ethanol. Tell us what's new.
Well, about 2 years ago, we started with a new form called the 819. And what that was doing, it was asking our respondents questions and laying out them tabularly, very similarly to how we do petroleum. And that was a big deal for us because, we approached biofuels differently and it just didn't align fully. And we felt like, if we're going to incorporate it in a supply-demand balance, it's got to look and feel just like the petroleum that is substituting out. And so all that survey enabled us to do that. And over time, we've been introducing the data that we're getting from that. So initially, we have this product called the Monthly Energy Review. And there used to be one table for ethanol and one table for biomass-based diesel, the infamous BBD, right? And we separated that table 10.4 into 3 parts. So there is a biodiesel representation, there's a renewable diesel representation, and other biofuels, which includes SAF and other things. And so the beauty of that is we aligned it with what we were seeing from EPA data so that we could see similar trends. And then not just introduce it, here it is, month 1. We wanted it to put it in context. So MER, our Monthly Energy Review, is out there with those data tables now. In addition, our Petroleum Supply Monthly has modified some of its tables so that you can now see what we call biofuels excluding ethanol spelled out more similarly. So you'd see biodiesel separate from renewable diesel, separate from other biofuels. In addition, we're showing it in STIO in our short-term energy outlook. We're providing the same 3-way view. So providing that additional transparency is it's so long overdue. So we're very excited to have all that data out there, plus all the new capacity data. Our feedstock data isn't as ready for prime time yet, but we're hoping to get that soon to a place where we'll feel confident in reporting that. And we're working through trying to give our stakeholders as much data as we can on biofuels so they can make the kinds of decisions they need to make going forward.
Right. Gosh, you guys sounds like you're very busy doing some great work. Let's shift gears just a bit. What is EIA reporting on biodiesel and renewable diesel trade?
So trade is an interesting situation for us. So we believe, one of the best sources of import data, on petroleum and biofuels out there. Our respondents have to give incredibly detailed data, and you can see down to the company and the port they're bringing it in and the volumes on a monthly basis. I mean, it's really detailed data. No protection of company confidential data at all on that survey. But when it comes to exports, we do not have our own survey. And so we get our data through Census and others, and we incorporate that and make sure it's aligned with our data. And what we see in the renewable diesel and biodiesel imports is that they're roughly neck and neck right now. And biodiesel some months almost goes to 0 on the import side, but we're seeing it moving around, but roughly neck and neck. And we do not expect a reduction in renewable diesel imports as long as certain large exporters out there continue their projects and, have California, what we call PAD 5, the West Coast, as a destination because of the additional financial incentives to bring their product there. But when it comes to the exports, with biodiesel, we had an error occur in January of 2022. And our problem is we do not go back and modify errors in our data until we issue the Petroleum Supply Annual. And the Petroleum Supply Annual for 2022 will not come out until August of 2023. So what that means is you're going to see this bizarre number for January 2022 biodiesel exports. It's totally off by an order of 10. Okay. And that is in our data set, unfortunately, until August of 23. But when it comes to renewable diesel exports, we're at a huge disadvantage. A few years back, certain folks worked to get the renewable diesel exports included in with the same code as diesel. And so we have no visibility into renewable diesel exports right now. We know they're happening. We know it anecdotally, but we do not have the data. So we're hoping to work with our partners in the federal government to get that data and make it available, because if it's going to increase, it's really important for us to have it, because when we do get at what consumption is, right, we need to have those exports reduced from what's available or identified as a domestic and as an external demand. So that's what we're looking forward to.
That makes sense. Okay. And so lately, there's been a lot of chatter about the Inflation Reduction Act. Will the EIA include the biofuel provisions of this act in the new annual energy outlook?
Well, we are in the process of looking into that. So one of the big provisions, of course, is the SAF provisions. And we're right now, our timing may be off because we are working towards getting our annual energy outlook for 2023 sort of done in the September-October timeframe. And the question becomes, do people want to see all of the IRA incorporated in our reference case, or do they really want to see a comparison of what would have been, without the IRA versus what's with those various provisions in there? And so we are still in the process of thinking through how to best reflect that. We had a similar issue when the bipartisan infrastructure law came out. So that came out right as we were ready to sort of wrap up and freeze all of our modeling output. And it was decided that we could delay release, incorporate some of the low-hanging fruit, and at least reflect it properly in the macro assumptions runs that we have. So, we're trying to be responsive, but it's in real time. I don't know what the final result will be, but we're not asleep. We are trying to address it in some way.
Got it. Thank you. Okay, well, I have one more question for you, Mindi. Which biofuel products do you include in your international energy outlook?
So I'm embarrassed to say that in our international energy outlook, we do not call out renewable diesel. We only include biodiesel, and as well as that separately. And so my goal is to eventually get us there, but I don't think it's going to happen next year. So stay with us as we sort of work that through, because it is important. If this product does become bigger in the trade, if it ends up in markets beyond the U.S., then it makes sense to have it balanced in there and reflected in our liquids. So we're not there yet, but hoping to get there.
Okay, well, we'll be watching for it. I think that brings us about time, Mindi. This has been very interesting, incredibly insightful. And on behalf of Biodiesel Magazine, I want to thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your expertise.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciated telling you guys what we're doing and how things are moving in the market. So thanks for giving us the platform to chat.
Absolutely, anytime. And to you listeners, make sure to watch for our next podcast. If you're interested in joining us for an episode, please reach out. We'll wrap it up with that. Thanks so much for tuning in, and have a great day.